Hi all, welcome to the first video in our limestone landscapes topic. Now this topic is really similar to the rivers topic in that the majority of the exam questions that you might see in this will focus on landscape features and expect you to explain how those features were formed. Now again, as with the rivers topic, there's a little bit of kind of background that we need to establish before we get into some of the detail of the landscape features. Now, in terms of erosional processes and things like that, a lot of them are very, very similar between limestone and rivers, but there is much more of a focus on chemical erosion or eroding by solution. And the reason behind that is what limestone is and how it's formed. So we need to discuss that. We need to discuss what limestone is and how it was actually formed before we go any further. So, first, what actually is limestone? So this is a nice picture of a bit of limestone. Now, it's a sedimentary rock laid down millions of years ago, very commonly laid down in warm tropical seas. And it's made up of the remnants of tiny sea creatures. Now this picture gives some pretty huge looking sea creatures. But the actual rock in limestone itself is made up of, tiny microscopic sea creatures. Made up of their shells, their skeletons, all this kind of stuff. Now this forms a mineral that we refer to as either calcite or calcium carbonate, and the terms are used fairly interchangeably. So these remains, so you had little sea creatures living in a warm tropical sea, and they died. So living, floating about, they die, and then their shells and skeletons drop to the bottom, and they pile up. Day on day, week on week, month on month, year on year, and this continues as if for hundreds, thousands, millions of years. And as these build up, they compress the layers beneath them, and as they compress them, it forms these very nice horizontal layers, and we refer to these as bedding planes. And I say, naturally, if nothing changes with this and then you dug a section down through the rock, you would find these nice kind of perfectly horizontal layers, and it just shows that this material was laid down underwater. Now, eventually, after millions of years, plate tectonics happens. The Earth doesn't stay the same, and we get areas of limestone like what we've got in the UK, where the sea that was over the top of it has dried up. The rock gets uplifted and it bends, and in the process of doing this, these nice horizontal layers snap and they break with vertical lines going up the way, travelling perpendicular to the bedding planes. And we call these lines joints. Now, this is really important. Both of these things are really important because it gives limestone two properties that really heavily influence how the landscape features that we're going to look at are formed. So first, the calcium carbonate that it's actually made up of. So we've got another picture here, some more limestone. The calcium carbonate that it's made up of will dissolve very, very readily, even in very mild acid. Now it also helps to think that rainwater is very mild acid. So limestone will dissolve very readily in rainwater. The next bit is that because the way limestone's made up, limestone's very, very porous by nature. Now what that means is that limestone will allow water to flow through it. So if you think of all those tiny shells that make up the stone, there's little spaces between them that water can exploit and water can flow through. So limestone can act a wee bit like a sponge sometimes. And this means that this water that will dissolve limestone can penetrate all the way through it, so it can erode it, all the way through a lot more quickly. Now, this marks the end of the introductory video on limestone. And the next video, we're going to go on and we're going to look at our first set of limestone features, which are all overground features. And I'll see you guys then.